Hey everybody, it's Spear here, back with our second deck profile of the week. Usually I like to try at least have one discussion video, but seeing as we're jumping into a new set soon, I figured, you know what, why not? Let's just have a couple of deck lists, show off what I've been playing with for the last little while, and then jump onto the new topics once Draft Box 6 and the inspection set actually come out and we start seeing those impacting the meta. Here we have Ramp Vegeta. And actually, if you want to see me play this deck list, I'm going to be live today on Twitch piloting this deck in my third week of the 3-mana circuit tournament. So you guys want to jump there, link will be in the description. But Ramp Vegeta is a deck that I've really been trying hard to make work. Specifically, I love Ramp. I love playing big stupid things, and you know, I'm a big fan of things that cheat costs. Ramp is another way that we cheat costs, just in the fact that, you know, a 6 cost card isn't our turn 6. It can be, you know, our turn 3, our turn 4, depending on how effectively we can ramp. And those are big things that I look to do when it comes to decks like these. How can we do the biggest, dumbest things and force our opponents into positions where they can't really move? So, of course, here's the deck list. If that's all you guys wanted, here it is. But now I'm going to jump into a bit of a breakdown. Of course, there are a couple of cards here that I'm going to say are hard to get. The most optimized version of this deck, in my opinion, requires these. So unfortunately, there's some expense in the deck. Specifically, we're talking the Baby 8 promos. Probably the best unison for the deck. I think there is justification to saying you should be running the Baby unison instead. Or maybe a different 2-drop like Zeno, because you are ramping. But in general, I found that the ape solves a lot of issues for the deck. You have a mana sink in the form of his activate main, where you can draw a ton of cards. You can +1 to be able to get your leader above the combo threshold, so your opponent can't discard out of it. And of course, the other one that's here is the TP Trunks. I think in the meta right now, where everyone's cheating out big bodies and going tall, it's too invaluable not to. But in general, the rest of the deck is pretty flexible, so we'll just jump into the proper breakdown. So first, of course, we have the leader. Swings, draws a card, and then if you deal damage to your opponent once per turn, you get to ramp a card from the top of your deck if it's mono blue. Here, it is important to note that no double strike does not let you proc it twice. It's once per turn, which means you only get one activation. The part that hurts the most about this leader is when your lives at 4 or less, you get to draw one card, and that's it. Obviously, a big balancing factor. Ramp is scary. Ramp has often been banned, if not straight up errataed in our game. So I can see where Bandai has decided, you know what, we kind of want to alleviate this being broken. We want to support Ramp. Here's how we balance it. It hurts. It honestly hurts. If this was a, you know, draw one, untap one leader, I think it'd like be one in the, it'd be in contention with all those other blue leaders like Soul Striker, like SS3, like Zamasu. However, unfortunately, with the way it is now, it's a bit tough because you could tap out and realistically have no way of untapping your energy until you get your turn back, which means you could just die, which has happened. On the Awakened side, he's effectively the same. He's still swing, draw one, and a rep if you deal damage to your opponent. However, here, if your opponent activates a counter skill, you get to untap, which is great. It gives you some extra aggro in the deck. It combos really well with the Unison Ape, because now you have 2 25k swings if you still have the Unison on board, which is pretty huge. Then, of course, we're running the blue core. At this point, I don't think there's very few decks that I can say can reliably run without this blue core. 4 Dimension Magics, 4 Sensu Beans. Sensu Beans primarily because this deck craves energy. A lot of its plays are very energy dependent, and you want to make sure you still have some up to be able to defend yourself or extend your plays. 3 Abunis. Mind you, here, I'm going to talk about some tech options later, but Abuni could be replaced. There's a lot of 4-drops right now that do fill a similar role to what Abuni's doing, so we'll talk about those afterwards, but I don't need to talk further about Abuni. It's a good aggression card. We got 4 of the Apes. Draw 2 cards. Mind you, this card did get an errata. So it's not just 2 blue, it's 2 blue and 2 of any color, which means it takes 4 energy for you to be able to draw 2 cards. The plus 10k to your leader is huge. It means you don't have to combo out to try and push in the damage. And here's the results. Either your opponent takes the damage or he's pitching 2 to 3 cards to defend himself, which he's probably not going to do, which is really good for you. -4. I think this got an errata too. Here it says you get to shuffle 5 mono blue cards from your drop back to your deck and then draw 2. I believe the errata also changed it so that it's 1 card, which I get, it's balanced. I do actually prefer if it was 5, but either way, you're almost never activating its ultimate, but it's there. Of course, we got the Baby Golden Avenger. Probably one of the best ways for us to close out in the game. I had 4 previously. I think 3 is just where we want to be. You don't want to see it early game, but you do want multiples because you have so much energy. It is likely for you to even get 2 off in one turn. So very powerful there. And of course, if we're running unisons, we gotta be running God Sealing. Just probably the best answer card in the game 95% of the time. Then we have our defenses, Mufuba. I think Mufuba is a phenomenal card in the format right now. I think it stops so many things. Go tanks, like their dual attacker, fine, here. I'm going to stop your dual attacker for 2 turns. Broly swap, I'm going to prevent your swap engine in a way that doesn't proc your leader, which is absolutely massive. And then there's just a bunch of like other little interactions. A lot of cards right now are really annoying to deal with. Mufuba says no. Majin Vegeta, let's say the 3-drop that restands on a counter. Well, you laugh at that because there. And now they can't even ship it to the bottom of your deck to draw a card. So Mufuba incidentally hits a lot of decks. I'm loving this card right now. 2 Son Gohan Baby Minion. When I was first building this deck, I had 4 of them. And this comes from a guy who loves Topo, right? So it makes sense. Topo just stops an opponent's turn. But the difference between 2 cards versus 1 card that your opponent has to pitch to attack is massive. A lot of decks do not care about having to pitch 1 card to attack. So a lot of times I would be putting myself in a position where I'd play the Gohan and then I'd basically have no other defenses for the turn. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. If you don't have additional defenses on top of this, odds are you're going to lose. Some decks, so it's still very good against. Broly swap can't afford to pitch cards out of its hand. Majin Vegeta probably can't afford to half the time also, depending on how aggressive it went. So there's a lot of decks where this does answer. And that's why I have 2. It's meta dependent, but generally I will say 2 is where you want to be because it's not as strong as it seems. On top of that, we have Vegeta ready to rumble. So I have him at 2 as well. And that's just because I think it's the stronger one of the 2, especially because it's a blocker, which means your opponent's going to have to neg 2 energy before his first attack gets through, unless he deals with the body. I like it a lot. I really appreciate the card, and it's great in the fact that if your opponent's going to keep swinging and he's not able to punch through, you just set him back 1, 2, 3 turns, which is absolutely massive. But again, we leave it at 2 because it's one of those cards where it doesn't stop your opponent from killing you. It just means that they're less incentivized to. But if your opponent has committed to the idea that this is going to be their kill turn, this is going to be the card that they're going into. So it's there, but it's one of those things where when you play a Son Gohan, when you play a Vegeta, make sure you have a Dimension Magic or something of the sort as an additional defense afterwards, because there are strong odds that your opponent's still going to be able to punch through for a massive push, if not just outright kill you through it. To that front though, we have 4 SS2 Trunks Heroic Prospect. Counterattack that costs 1 if you have a Unison card, and then your opponent can't attack with things greater than their energy unless they bottom 2 cards from their hand. Way more Topo-like. It costs 1 energy, which is absolutely massive. There's not much to say, right? This card is super powerful. It deals with a ton of things in the format. Broly swap, Dark Broly, Go Tanks, Vegex. Like, there's so much incidental decks that it hits. It's too powerful. Here, it's a meta choice, right? And I think that's the thing. These 3 negates between the Son Gohan, the Vegeta, and the Trunks, I think really depends on the meta, and the numbers will shift depending on what you see. Right now, for what we're seeing in the meta, I'm saying SS2 Trunks is the way to go. And finally, we wrap that up with a Baby Hatchak. I love this SCR, and I think it doesn't get the respect it deserves still. The prices are going up though. Blue decks are doing well, so you know the card is getting more expensive. But I will say this card does everything you want it to do. It just, there's no other card like it that straight up says you get another turn, which is absolutely massive. Then we have to close out the game. We have a bunch of energy. What do we want to do it with? Well, first we have SS4 Vegeta that gets us there. For every mono blue in the top 4 of our deck when we play him, he gets to draw or ramp with it. So oftentimes I ramp half and draw half depending on what my next turn play is going to be. And then he untaps at the end of your turn, which is great because he's a 30k attacker that becomes a blocker. It's phenomenal. It's a good mix of having aggro as well as defensive options afterwards. I love this ability, and it sets up our closers as well as being a great way to close out the game himself as just a recurring 30k attacker. Specifically, of course, blue decks that go big, you want an Android 17 turning on Tide. Just the most powerful closer in blue, especially because blue has a really great ability of building a board. It just can't finish with it. But this is a great way of saying that, because boom comes on board, you and your opponent have no more hand, but you don't care. Usually you have a way to, you line it up so that you draw a couple of cards on the turn anyways. He's a critical, which means you're not going to be giving your opponent health when you attack in with him in the first place. And it has deflect, which means its ability will be going off no matter what. And then we have a 1-of energy Frenzy Kefla. I misread this card. I've been misreading a lot of blue cards lately, but I misread this card and thought you have to pay 7. No, she's cheaper by 1 for every single blue battle card on your field, which is absolutely massive. And then activate main, you draw 2 cards, and at the end of your turn, you get to untap 2 of your energy. Absolutely massive. It's one of those cards that the longer and longer it stays on board, the more and more it accrues of value, which is super great. I don't want to see a ton of her because she is a dead card until late in the game. But if we're in a grind matchup where I'm just trying to draw cards and not advantage my opponent, she's phenomenal. And finally, here's one of the big reasons I wanted to play Ramp Vegeta: Tragedy over ground. I had this at 3 before. We toned it down to 2 because you really only want to see it in the late game, even though it is a really early charge in the early game. Comes in, board wipes your opponent, ignoring barrier, and then anytime your opponent wants to play something that costs 4 or more, it just goes to their energy instead. For a lot of decks right now in the meta, this just wins you the game. Gotenks can't play past this. Sin Shenron almost can't play past this. They have quite a few 3-drops, so they can, but you take away a lot of their potential. Broly swap, good luck. Opposing blue decks, good luck, right? So this answers almost everything. The top part is that it costs 9, and in this deck, we're not cheating it out. We're not using this Zamasu in general. I am working on something though, so keep your eyes open for maybe something next week or the week after. But we're not cheating it out. We're just playing it the way... we're just playing it the hard way, which is for 9. But your deck can get to that. With Vegeta, you are guaranteed having the energy that you want for Tragedy over ground the turn after. And then after that, it's just closing out the game with your beaters, which is really easy because you have a bunch of 30Ks, you have a bunch of blockers. There's a lot of ways to effectively get this off and not die. I will say that's the toughest part of it though, is playing this and not dying the turn after. But you can line up your defenses to be able to do that. It's not the end of the world. And I don't think I've resolved this card once and not won the game afterwards. And you know what? Some games you just don't resolve it, and that's okay. Your other cards in your deck are plenty powerful enough to get you there. So now we have to talk about the tech slots. And here there's... okay, so I messed up the animation there. But effectively, Mechikabra, I have him as a 2 of. I love doing something cheeky like board wiping with the SS4 Unison and then playing Mechikabra and naming a card I don't want to come back. So I've done it with board wiping and then naming Babidi against an AOD deck. That was hilarious. I've done it against 1-drop Dragonballs. So I board wipe, so I Mechikabra'd and then I board wiped, so then my opponent couldn't play 1-drops off of me popping off his Sin Shenrons, would set him back a couple of turns actually, as opposed to just the one that SS4 would already set back. So there's a number of situations you can do that are really cute. However, I can see not wanting to put black in. Hitting Mechikabra when you want to ramp is really feels bad. And of course, Isekai does a lot in terms of if your opponent's a very defensive deck like Baby, or if your opponent's playing a very answer heavy card deck, then Isekai is a great card in being able to get you, not only it straight up replaces a card, it gives you a turn 1 play, which the deck doesn't really have, as well as being able to force your opponent to have to neg if they want to start answering your cards. So of course we already talked about a Boonie. There's 3 of it in the deck. Like I was saying before, I think the Janemba is a great tech option if you'd rather go that route instead. The hardest point about the deck is making sure that you can pull off plays while still having energy for your defense. It's a very energy hungry deck. You use a lot of energy, a lot of turns, especially on your defense. So you want to make sure that you always have it available. Janemba is a great threat that's critical, and you're guaranteed to get it replace itself as well as getting your energy back. So it's a phenomenal tech option instead. Here we got 2 SS4 Son Gokus. Honestly, I love this card. It was at 3. I think 2 is enough because you really only need to deploy 2 a game. When it comes in, your opponent can't attack unless they bottom one of their battle cards, which is great. And then for -1, you draw 2 cards, pitch 1 at the bottom of your deck. Again, really good. Sets up your draws. There's a lot of cards that you might not want depending on the matchup. This is a great way to cycle those. And then this main ability, -2 is a board wipe. I value board wipes so much in decks. I think they're hugely powerful. This one ignores barrier and forces your opponent to be taxed on their attacks if they want to keep going the turn after. I think this is a phenomenal card. It is a shame though that it's a 15k. At 20k, I think this card would be unstoppable, but that's fine. It's balanced. At 15k, it's a strong card. Do I think I bump it up when we get the expansion set and we get that Vegeta that cheats him out? I don't know. I think it's cute. I don't know if that's the line we'll be going for, but either way, it's a phenomenal card. Definitely something to keep your eyes out for. And then the option we are opting for here is the Vegeta Disciplined Warrior as far as our super combo. There's a lot of options we can have here. Well, we're trying to stray away from the multicolor ones simply because obviously if we hit a multicolor on a ramp, that super feels bad. And we opted to not go for Zeno. I could see myself go for one Zeno though, just because this deck can tap out and that feels super bad. So a one Zeno means that you have the option to be able to go defensive again and use your beans and stuff like that without having to die. So that's the only separating factor I would say here. Maybe one Zeno, and then I would keep it to 3 of the Vegetas, especially considering we can pitch away cards that we don't need to draw into more gas. And that's the deck list. Honestly, a super fun list. I think it's almost there. I think right now this deck would be sitting at like tier 2 1.5. There's a couple of things that the other blue decks that do that are just stronger. They're more proactive. They're easier to get off. There's not as many restrictions. Their leaders are more flexible. But overall, I think the blue core is very strong. Any deck that runs the blue core has some competitive viability. And the things that Vegeta allows you to do, because it has availability of so much energy, is a lot of fun, as well as attacking your opponent differently than they're probably used to. But overall, a super fun list. Of course, if you want the deck list, the link will be down in the description. But that was the build, or my current build for Ramp Vegeta. What do you guys think of the deck list? Do you like it? Would you guys run something different? I think the Tragedy Overground is super, super spicy. Either way, let me know in the comments down below. If you guys liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Hey, if you thought it was bad, thumbs down works too. And if you want to catch more of my videos, then feel free to hit subscribe. We're posting every day of the week. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.